Toby, do you consider this war on woke to be something we'll ever win?
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind, Mark, is that it isn't just the woke. There is currently a move at Bristol University to try and get a hard left professor fired because some of his views about Israel and Zionism are deemed to be anti-Semitic. And he's currently fighting to preserve his job at Bristol. He's a law professor. I think for the most part, attacks on free speech on campus come from the woke left, but not exclusively. And I think it's important to bear in mind that it isn't just a fight that needs to be waged on behalf of, male, pale and stale conservatives like us, Mark. Everyone's free speech is important. When our free speech is attacked, that means everyone's free speech is in jeopardy. And the benefit of putting stronger protections of free speech in place at universities is that a much wider range of views will be able to express. People won't be nervous about losing their livelihoods, being put through vexatious complaints procedures, being no platformed, regardless of whether they're right wing or left wing. It's important, I think, to stress that this is a fight that for everyone's benefit, not just for conservatives.
Now, Toby, it's a couple of decades since we were undergraduates at university, but I don't remember this problem when I was at Edinburgh in the mid-90s. What's happened to these great academic institutions?
Well, that's a really good question, Mark. It's certainly, I don't think there was a complete absence of the problem in the mid-80s. The Conservative government in 1986 passed an Education Act to try and make the no platforming of controversial speakers unlawful, in part because so many Conservative ministers had been no platformed by student unions in the mid-80s. So it did happen then, but it didn't happen on the scale on which it's happening now. The Free Speech Union was launched about a year ago, and in that time we've had to intervene over 100 times to protect the speech rights of both students and academics at universities. People who claim this isn't a problem are living in cloud cuckoo land, and it's certainly got a lot worse in the past few years. As you say, why should that be? I think it partly reflects the rise of the woke left, which is quite authoritarian, quite intolerant, quite censorious. I think it reflects the polarization of political debate. So people on both sides are less tolerant of people on the other and more willing to engage in underhand ways of trying to silence their opponents. I think it's because the current generation are much more concerned about their emotional safety than we were. They seem to be, for want of a better word, more snowflakey than we were. There's a sort of obsession with safe spaces, protecting people from microaggressions and so forth, all of which suggests that this generation at least think of themselves as quite psychologically fragile. And I think they've got hold of this mistaken idea that being confronted with intellectually challenging ideas, having to defend their own ideas, is psychologically harmful, which of course is completely wrong. The opposite is true. Not being confronted with intellectual challenge, not learning how to defend yourself, not becoming more robust as a result of having been to university and participated in lively discussions and debate. That's what's psychologically harmful. We need, I think, to dissuade this generation that there's anything remotely harmful. Nothing about intellectual challenge is going to endanger their emotional well-being.
Only enhance it, clearly. And I mentioned earlier in the show that through history, through humanity, we have had a battle of ideas. And Toby, sometimes the left are right, sometimes the right are on the money. And in this country, we've had Labour governments that have made enormous contributions to our society. Then we've had Conservative governments that have done the same. It's the yin and yang of political discourse, and we've got to continue with that. Do you consider Labour's recent electoral collapse, not just on Super Thursday last week, but also in December 2019, to be a sign that many voters have had enough of woke politics?
Well, that does seem to be one of the factors, I think, which accounts for Labour's very poor performance, not just last week, but also at the 2019 general election. And it's not just true of the left wing political parties here. It's also true across Europe. And, you know, Joe Biden only just managed to win the US presidential election. I think get woke, go broke applies to left of center political parties across the West. So I do think that's a factor. I think one of the problems the Labour Party has is that a lot of these wokesters exist in a bubble. And they go to enormous lengths to protect that bubble. Anyone who challenges their woke ideology, their dogma, is immediately turned on by an outrage mob whipped up by the kind of witch-finder generals of kind of woke orthodoxy, and excommunicated, pushed out. If they can get them sacked, they will. If they can get them thrown out of institutions, they will. And the difficulty with creating that authoritarian, censorious climate of stifling debate is that they're never challenged. People don't say to them, hang on a minute, are you sure, taking the knee and being photographed taking the knee, Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, is a good idea and will actually win you support in the red wall seats. And that because it's now taboo, in for a dig, to challenge these prevailing woke ideas, the Labour Party's sort of been able to spin off into cloud cuckoo land. If there was more debate, if there was a kind of culture in which people who challenged these ideas weren't immediately penalised and branded homophobes or transphobes or purveyors of hate speech, if people actually engaged in constructive debate, courteous, respectful debate about these issues, the Labour Party might be in a much healthier position.
And of course, it's very dangerous because many woke enthusiasts have appropriated the anti-racist compassion agenda. But the bottom line is these are values which are British values, which almost everybody watching and listening to this have. Values in which we condemn racism as the most awful stain on humanity, in which we want a society which is more equal. And most of us, Toby, I think you're quite a nice man sometimes. So this is not the domain, not the monopoly of the woke, but cleverly they've leveraged and weaponized these values.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think nearly everyone believes in equal rights, equal opportunities for people of all ethnicities, all genders, and so forth. To try and characterize exponents of free speech as wanting to use free speech in order to roll back those gains, roll back the civil rights that have been achieved by various historically disadvantaged groups over the past 25, 50 years is just a smear. And I think one really important thing to bear in mind, Mark, is that movements like the American civil rights movement wouldn't have been able to have the kind of political impact they did in the 1960s without various landmark victories won by the American Civil Liberties Union, First Amendment victories. It was because of those fights taken on and won by free speech warriors at the ACLU that civil rights leaders were able to protest, organize, march, and achieve what they did. The same applies to the gay rights movement in the 1970s. You could say the same applies to the trans rights movement now. In the absence of free speech, in the absence of those vital protections, those great civil rights victories wouldn't have been won. So if you're concerned about the rights of historically marginalized groups, if you think that male, pale, privileged Tories like me have too much power, then you should be in favor of free speech. Free speech is the way to win power, win influence, win rights for historically disadvantaged groups. Free speech and social justice go hand in hand. They're not in any way opposed.
Without free speech, you have no democracy. Toby, you are doing your bit. Keep fighting the fight and let's connect soon.